How to Read Poetry Like a Professor by Thomas C. Foster. How is Poetry? Chapter 3, Redeeming the Time. What's that? You don't understand the whole meter thing? As far as you can tell, iambic's last name is pentameter, and you think that rhythm should be followed by blues? Welcome to the club. There is perhaps nothing about poetry that is disconcerting as the whole business of meter and rhythm. What about all those terrible things we call lines of poetry in English? You know, trochaic trimeter and dactylic hexameter, that sort of nonsense. Another linguistic accident, an unholy marriage of Greek terminology filtered through Latin. That sort of thing begets monsters. But it is the terminology, not the lines, that are monstrous. Here's the basic fact. For most of its history, poetry in English has been built on a foundation of lines that in turn are built out of words arranged to form rhythmic patterns. These patterns can, and often do, find their way into songs. And once we know the basic patterns, we have only to count how often they repeat in a line to name it. Forget Greek, think music, with a little arithmetic. Find the beat, then count it off. Let's move a little slowly here. This stuff can make heads spin. First, the one word you might know, I am, which, for the record, isn't one. It's a trochee. More in a moment. An I am is a metrical foot, which means a repeatable pattern of stresses composed of an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable, which we can denote as da-dum, as in weak strong. Succeed is an I am, so is elect. Its paired opposition, metrically, is trochee, which, unlike I am, is the thing it designates, a pair of syllables in which the first is stressed, dum-da, or in this case, tro-key, or I am. Here's the thing to remember. The metrical foot is independent of the word. That is to say, sometimes the poetic line may use succeed as a complete metrical foot, in this case an I am, but it is just as likely to split it so that suck is the second syllable of a trochee, while seed is the first syllable in another one. In that particular line, the poet may have options to use flourish or triumph, but the meter dictates a word with the second syllable accented, so succeed would be the choice. Is it any surprise that we get confused about all of this? Just try to remember this. In metrical counting, words don't matter. Syllables do. Meter at work. Let's put this newfound knowledge into practice. Here is the opening quatrain of a fairly famous poem. Good news here. There's not one word in it that you don't know, and only one funky ending. That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none, or few, do hang. Upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. Even if you don't know about the poet, you know that the poem is old, right? Not a lot of poets in the 20th or 21st centuries have gone around using thou or mayst, although the number isn't quite 0. This sonnet has a number, 73, and it belongs to Shakespeare, which puts it back a spell. The original book of his sonnets appeared in 1609. We'll come back to it as a poetic statement later on, but for now, we're just talking about rhythm and meter. And the meter here is iambic pentameter, or 5 of those little da-dum iambs laid end to end to make a line. That time of year thou mayst in me behold, with syllables 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 stressed. Same thing in the next 2 lines, stressed on the even syllables. But then something different in line 4. Beru and choirs where late the sweet birds sang. Whoa, that's not iambic or pentameter. 2 things stand out here. First, we have that hammering effect of 3 consecutive stressed syllables, after which we can hardly find our bearings to see if any iambs remain. They do. And after we get over that rhythmic shock, we discover that somebody stole a syllable. It's tough to have 5 iambs with only 9 syllables. So we have only 9, but 6 of those are stressed. Is that even legal? Yes, it is. Meter is not law, it's framework. If it is slavishly followed as law, moreover, the result is monotonous and more often than not unintentionally funny. We actually need relief from the pattern every once in a while, at least where lyric poetry is concerned. Narrative poems are another story. This one has a different pattern at work. True, it has a few squirrely words, but they're either made up or borrowed from Native American lore, and in any case, they don't get in the way of the meaning. By the shore of Gitchigumi, by the shining big seawater, at the doorway of his wigwam, in the pleasant summer morning. Hiawatha stood and waited. All the air was full of freshness. All the earth was bright and joyous, and before him, through the sunshine, westward toward the neighboring forest, passed in golden swarms the amo, past the bees, the honeymakers, burning, singing in sunshine. This is music of a different sort, and compared to Shakespeare, practically brand new. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, in 1855, produced one of the great American epics, the Song of Hiawatha, of which this is the beginning of the final chapter, Hiawatha's departure. The first thing you will notice, especially if you've just read Shakespeare's sonnet opening, is that somebody moved the stresses. They are in front of their unstressed partners, giving us dum-da, dum-da. Or maybe you notice that the lines are shorter. You see that change even before reading it. Don't discount cues like this, which tell us simply by taking up less of the page that the count of metrical feet will be smaller. Here, there are 4 feet per line. We call that one tetrameter, meaning 4 feet. Think of it as 4 bounces, up, down. And the feet themselves, trochees. Put them together and you get trochaic tetrameter, or trochees times 4. So why is this particular arrangement of stresses for this long poem? For one thing, there's a touch of cultural appropriation here. Longfellow is aiming for a drumbeat pattern. And as we know from our classic Western movies, drumbeats never arrange themselves into iambs, obviously. On top of that, the comparatively short lines and symmetry, 4 feet split evenly in a way that 5 feet never do, encourages readers to march along, line after line, for a very long time. 4 beats and forward, 4 beats and forward. For Longfellow in this poem, the goal is to drive us down the page and over to the next page and the next and the next, which is important because there are a lot of next pages. The third of these elements is what is called the feminine ending. All that means is that the last syllable of the line is unstressed. Stressed final syllables are called masculine. We will just have to get past the inherent sexism, strength is manly, and so on, and agree that neither you nor I chose the names. While I don't find unstressed syllables particularly gendered one way or another, I do find them slightly unfinished when they end a line. I suppose my ear is attuned to the cadence of iambs and lines ending on the beat. We can return to the matter of line endings and sex another time, but this discussion is enough trauma for now. So, there you have it. 2 poems, 2 different meters with stresses reversed and line lengths varied. There are lots more options where those came from. One of those is pentameter, the other tetrameter. So, just how many meters are there? There is theoretically no limit, although practically the number is small. Thank goodness. One could hardly imagine a single-foot line, just 2 syllables, and then on to the next line of just 2, and so on, marching the metrical order down the page. A 2-foot line is slightly more likely, which is why there is actually a word for it, dimeter, although I have yet to see one that doesn't take frequent liberties with both meter and number of syllables. Here are the usual suspects. Dimeter, 2 metrical feet, of whatever shape, as with all of these. Trimeter, 3 metrical feet. Tetrameter, 4. Pentameter, 5. Hexameter, 6. Heptameter, 7. Octameter, 8. Beyond here, there be monsters. This isn't so tough. If we ignore the meters, we recognize those prefixes from di, as in dichotomy, to tri, as in pretty much everything, and penta, as in the pentagon, to hepta, as in the once every 4 years the heptathlon women's track multi-event. True, tetra doesn't come up much in everyday speech, so that one you might have to commit to memory. The rest, however, you can mostly figure out. Better still, the shortest one and the longest two don't occur very often in nature. So we really only have to record to trimeter, tetrameter, pentameter, and hexameter on a regular basis. So that's how lines count off their feet. But how do we reckon the feet themselves? Because there are names, although, alas, they are all Greek. And their number for our purposes is 5. I am. An unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. Da-dum, as in delay, or pronounced correctly, Detroit, my bad. Trochee, the opposite. A stressed followed by an unstressed syllable. Dum-da, as in Thomas Foster. Spondy, 2 stressed syllables in a row. Dum-dum, as in dum-dum. Anapest, a 3-syllable foot. 2 unstressed syllables followed by 1 stressed. Da-da-dum, as in the house. Dactyl, the reverse. 1 stressed syllable followed by 2 unstressed ones. Dum-da-da, as in not a chance. There are others, but do you really need to know that Pyrrhic is the term for 2 unaccented syllables hanging out together, or that there are words for 3 unaccented syllables or 3 accented syllables that form a poetic foot? Thought not. Those are the 5 terms we need to discuss virtually all situations that will arise in English metrical verse. And as with line lengths, we can dispense with a couple of these. For obvious reasons, spondees hardly ever flock together. Think about it. A line of spondaic pentameter would be at 10 consecutive stressed syllables. Likely? Not very. Dactyls, for their part, are great ways to start lines, less great as ways to end them. Those 2 unstressed syllables feel like something fizzling out. As a result, we often see them used in concert with other feet, as with Walt Whitman's Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking, which alternates a dactyl with a trochee repeated. The term for such mixing within a line is logoidic, but I recommend you forget it and remember the concept. Now, being Whitman, he doesn't maintain the pattern throughout the reverts to free verse, although he does begin many key lines with a dactyl, which imparts a sort of forward momentum. Anapests appear more frequently at the organizing foot of poems, but they appear more frequently in comic verse than in serious poetry, favored by such boards of merriment as Lewis Carroll and Dr. Seuss. The example you know best, in all likelihood, comes around every year. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. Sort of makes you have to have more respect, doesn't it? And the fact that it is also the matter of the cat in the hat, although Dr. Seuss breaks those longer lines of Clement Clarke Moore's in half and makes 2 lines of each one. Young readers, short lines, you understand. And trochees? I've already given you the chief example of trochaic verse in the Song of Hiawatha. Those lines are trochaic tetrameter, trochee times 4, by the shore of Gitchigumi by the shining Big Sea water, giving Longfellow the drumbeat sort of rhythm. What we're talking about here is scansion, the analysis of how metrical arrangements play out in the real world, or how a line scans. We should remember that meter is merely the framework over which a poem is stretched. When we examine the actual poem, we not only find out what the baseline meter is, but also how and where, and maybe why, the poem departs from that pattern. And what we're really doing is finding out why we feel what we feel about the poem's rhythm. The names of things don't matter so much as that we can see what's going on metrically. The names just make it possible for us to discuss what we're seeing. Neither of us will likely remember that those 3 stress words, bare ruined choirs, have a name, molossus, or care. As long as you have intuited, metrical feet and line length inevitably get together. Knowing that a verse is written in pentameter tells us nothing until we know its sort of foot is repeated 5 times over. Among other things, a dactylic pentameter line would be longer than its iambic cousin by 5 syllables, a not inconsiderable number. At the same time, the iambic line will end on a stress, while the stressed syllable of the last dactyl has to look over two unstressed colleagues to see the end of the line, all of which is to say that they have little in common except a fivefold pattern. Metrical options. I suggested earlier that metrical lines over 6 beats, roughly 12 syllables, are uncommon. That, however, doesn't mean they don't exist. Consider this bit of iambic octameter, 8 feet of whatever meter, Stellini's from W.S. Gilbert's The Pirates of Penzance. I am the very model of a modern major general, of information vegetable, animal, and mineral. I know the kings of England, and I quote the fights historical, from Marathon to Waterloo, in order categorical. I'm very well acquainted, too, with matters mathematical. I understand equations, both the simple and quadratical. About binomial theorem I am seaman with a lot of news, with many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse. Now, for best results, it needs to be spoken, or sung if you know the tune, very fast. That's in the name of what are called patter songs, in which Gilbert and Sullivan specialized in their comic operas. One thing that you might notice here is the inversion of nouns and adjectives at the end of lines. Taking this sort of liberty is often referred to as poetic license, or one aspect of it, by which we mean the freedom we accord poets to abuse certain conventions of grammar or word order to achieve desired effects. The desired effect here, beyond metrical arrangement and rhyme scheme, is comedy. Order categorical is just funny, to say nothing of, I understand equations both the simple and quadratical. Very long lines are frequently employed, to the extent that anything about them is frequent, for either comic or Gothic effects. Some will disagree with my declaration of the meter here, and indeed other scansion arrangements can be argued. But if we hear both strong and weak stresses here, general, the 8 stresses appear more clearly. If we turn the beat around and go looking for trochaic, rather than iambic, rhythm, we find Edgar Allan Poe and something decidedly not comic. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. Poe digs deep into his bag of tricks to invoke a dark and foreboding atmosphere. Trochees in and of themselves are not spooky, once you get to know them, but he also employs internal rhymes within lines themselves, as in dreary and weary in line 1, and napping, tapping, rapping in lines 3 and 4. And words of certain heaviness, pondered, weary, nodded, curious. The passage is a few ounces away from being lead-in, but those ounces make all the difference. Now, having laid out the possibilities for how many metrical feet may appear in a line, we have to get confusing. You might think that a stanza would be made up of lines that are all the same length. That would be logical. It would also be wrong. Line length can vary within stanzas so long as the variation is consistent and therefore predictable. If you write a stanza in which the lines contain 4, 3, 2, 5, 6, and 4 feet, nobody's going to want to sit with you at lunch, especially if the next one has a completely different pattern. Hey, it's a tough crowd in the poet's cafeteria. If, on the other hand, you alternate, say, 4 metrical feet in lines 1 and 3, and 3 metrical feet in lines 2 and 4, it's all good. In fact, that is a famous arrangement called common meter, ballad meter, or common measure, ballad measure, fabled in story and song. Particularly song, you've been hearing it all your life. It rained all night the day I left, the weather it was dry. The sun so hot I froze to death. Susanna, don't you cry. Maybe Oh Susanna isn't as much of a hit in elementary school as it was years ago, but I seem to recall singing it every year in music class. Okay, if that isn't seared into your brain, maybe this is. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Or, oh beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesty above the fruited plain. We begin to see the pattern here if we get past the really ugly orthography, 4-3-4-3 line alternation with rhymes on the second and fourth lines. Amazing Grace is the odd song out, with its rhyming of the odd-numbered lines as well. Oh, and always with iambs. If it isn't iambic, I think, then the measure isn't all that common. As regards the rhyme scheme, sometimes the two lines are written out as one, as in the yellow rose of Texas. She's the yellow rose of Texas that I am going to see. Nobody else can miss her, not half as much as me. Those lines are often called 14ers because they contain 14 syllables. This, of course, has nothing to do with meter and everything about how the eye perceives the page. The mere appearance of a 14-syllable lines makes us uneasy, even if we're used to prose filling up much more of the available space. On the other hand, we see the lines as published and instantly think, I can get through that. As you might expect, the common measure is not unknown to poets who are not writing words for music. This is from the final section of Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Farewell, farewell, but this I tell to thee, the wedding guest. He prayeth well, who loveth well, both man and bird and beast. He prayeth best, who loveth best, all things great and small. For the dear God who loveth us, he made and loveth all. As with pretty much everything he does, Coleridge takes liberties with the common measure. You'll notice here that he too rhymes the odd-numbered lines, which is not standard. He also sometimes has stanzas that have 6 lines, still following the odd-even pattern, and in at least one case doubles the odd line, so that his pattern is 4-3-4-4-3, but just for that one stanza. If you're a genius, you can take liberties. One of the attractions of common measure is that it works for ballads, which can be long. It can be carried along with or without melody for many stanzas. The Ancient Mariner finishes up at 625 lines, the odd number reflecting that one eccentric stanza. We can follow along in parts because the rhythm drives us to the next line in the next stanza. It becomes a sort of rhythmic engine to carry the poem forward. But even poets who write very short poems can fall in love with common measure, as Dickinson proves in poem after poem, which is why the vast majority of her poems can be sung to the tune of The Yellow Rose of Texas. Sure, you can do it to America the Beautiful, but it won't be as much fun. And that brings us to a critical observation. Having learned to find the stresses, ignore them! Read poems as naturally as you can. Stresses will make themselves known without any outside assistance. Every poem has its own rhythm and its own melody. Don't bang the drum. Listen for the music.